Recording in progress.
Sicha from Parshas Vayishlach, this week's Parsha, Chelek Gimel Likkutei Sichos, in other words, volume 3. So the Rebbe is going to speak about the two names that Yaakov Avinu was known, not just like let's say by Avram Avinu, where there was one period in his life where he's known as Avram, and then he was known as Avraham. But Yaakov and Yisrael are names that go on for all time. Yaakov Avinu was always called by these two names. So first he's going to contrast this with what happened with Avraham Avinu. Let's begin from number 1. This week's Torah reading relates how Hashem changed Yaakov's name, declaring, Yaakov kim Yisrael Yishmecha, your name will no longer be Yaakov. Instead, your name will be Yisrael. Our sages compare this verse with the verse by Avram Avinu. Your name will no longer be Avram. Instead, it will be Avraham. By the way, the bold is the actual translation of the Sicha. The non-bold text is the interpolation of the translator. And state that a person who refers to Avram by the name Avram commits a transgression, for it is written, Lo yikarei oid shimcha Avram. Your name will no longer be Avram. So therefore, if someone is considered doing an Aveda by calling Avraham Avram, why then, ask our sages, does one not commit a transgression when he refers to Yaakov by that name, rather by the name Yisrael, because in the same way it says Lo yikarei shimcha oid Yaakov kim Yisrael, similar to what it says by Avram. After all, it is also written, your name will no longer be Yaakov. Our sages explain that the renaming of Yaakov was different than the renaming of Avram. From the time Hashem gave Avram his new name, the Torah refers to him with that name alone. He only calls him Avram. No more calling Avraham Avram. With regard to Yaakov, by contrast, even after Hashem gave him the name Yisrael, the Torah continues to refer to him as Yaakov. So this is how the Chazal explain and answer the difference between Yaakov and Avram in the legalistic sense. And why, how do we know that it's permitted to keep on calling Yisrael Yaakov? Because we see that the Torah keeps on calling, Hashem keeps on calling him Yaakov throughout the Torah. So therefore, since Hashem keeps on calling him, we know that this does not mean to negate that we cannot call Yisrael anymore Yaakov, as opposed to Avraham, that once Hashem changed his name, we don't see Hashem refer to him anymore as Avram. This only explains the facts. This only explains the legal ramifications. Chassidus always wants to delve deeper and find out the reason behind it. What is truly the difference between the two of them? What is the rationale for this distinction? Why does the Torah still refer to Yaakov by that name, even after he was given the name Yisrael? In Chassidus it is explained that the names Yaakov and Yisrael are not just individual names, but they reflect two different modes of divine service, Avodas Hashem. Every Jew must possess both traits, and that's why Yaakov and Yisrael can be called the whole time by that name. For there are times when a Yid, a Jew, must carry out his divine service, Avodas Hashem, in the path reflected by the name Yaakov, and other times in which his divine service must reflect the path of Yisrael. And we will explain later on that Yaakov and Yisrael may refer to different levels of Yidden, but even the different levels, each one of them must incorporate in their avodah each one of these names. So he says, although Yisrael is a superior name, alluding to a loftier spiritual level, at certain times and in certain situations, the divine service Avodas Hashem of Yaakov is also necessary, despite the fact, once we're Yisrael, we're going for such a high level, why deal with Yaakov? So the Rebbe is going to go on to explain. Section 2. The difference between the modes of service identified with Yaakov and Yisrael can be described as follows. The name Yaakov indicates that the brachas he received from Yitzchak were acquired through deception and trickery. Through like it says, the Chazal used the expression be'akva uberemia, that it was a trickery. He undermined Esav. Through cleverness, Yaakov was able to snatch Yitzchak's blessings, brachas, from Esav. Yisrael, by contrast, reflects a higher level, a higher rung. For Yisrael, there is no need to secure brachas, blessings, by craftiness. Instead, they are granted him with nobility and in a revealed manner, as it says concerning, as Rashi mentions, that this is the brachas that were given to by the Malach to Yaakov. Lo yikari Shimcha Yaakov. The brachas are not being given to you anymore by trickery. This is something that's being given to you as a noble. That's what it means, sar. That he's a sar kel. He's a noble. He's an important person. On to the next page. The actions of the patriarchs, Maaseh Avos, are a sign for their descendants. It's called Siman Labanim. This means not just a sign, but an empowerment, providing Yidden and Jews in every generation with the guidance in their Avodas Hashem, divine service. Many of the defining spiritual characteristics of Yaakov's mode of service are reflected in the story of his receiving the brachas his father intended for Esav. What Yaakov is about is can be derived from that whole story that happened. The meaning of a verse never departs from a straightforward interpretation. Ein mikra yotzim de pshutai. Thus, the brachas given by Yitzchak to Yaakov, the dew of the heavens and the fat of the earth, that metalo shemaim shmanei aretz, since a pasuk doesn't leave its simple meaning, refer to material prosperity. In the simple sense, Yitzchak was giving a bracha for material wealth, etc. To receive these brachas, blessings, Yaakov and Rivka were willing to take life-threatening risks and employed various forms of deception. For example, Yaakov had to wear the clothes that Esav had taken from Nimrod. Even though Nimrod had caused the entire world to rebel against Hashem with his kingship, that's what it's called, Nimrod, from the word merida, rebellion. So this was seemingly a great descent for Yaakov, to garb himself in the garments of someone that stood for rebelling against Hashem. What was the purpose of these tactics that Yaakov and Rivka had to perform? To extract the nitzutzes, the sparks of godliness contained in these material entities, and elevate them to holiness. In other words, Yitzchak was giving a bracha for material things, and we needed to elevate the sparks of these material things. So Yaakov went on Mesiras Nefesh, on self-sacrifice, to enclothe himself in the garments of Nimrod, to elevate these sparks. What does this mean for us? That we also sometimes need to dress ourselves in certain garments. We need to use trickery and deception just to elevate the sparks. This serves as a lesson for us in our Avodas Hashem divine service. A Jew must approach eating, drinking, and other material activities with a certain measure of craft and deception. How does a person perpetrate a fraud? What does it mean to be a ramai, to be a trickster? How a fraud is not your outright lying to the person's face. You're tricking them. Externally, you're making yourself like your friend, his friend. You're trying to help the person. He does not reveal his true intent. He begins by appearing to follow the path which his opponent desires, but at a crucial point, he changes the course and does what he desires, the fraudster desires, although it is against the other's wishes. So the person that's trying to defraud someone else acts in a friendly manner, acts in a manner to say, we're on the same page over here, and then at the last minute he turns it around and extracts from that other person that he's trying to defraud whatever he wants to get out of that person. That, the Rebbe says, has to be the way how a Yid has to engage with the world, tricking the world and tricking the Yetzer Hara that in its engaging in the world. This is the way a Jew should approach material activities. On the surface, he's involved in material activities like everyone else. He doesn't look like someone that's out to do anything spiritual and holy. He eats, drinks, and deals in commerce and the like. However, what is his true intention? What's going on in his mind behind the scenes? He engages in these activities, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, not for any material purpose at all. He wears Esav's clothes. This is the meaning of Esav's clothes, because he's engaging with the physical world, but carries out all his material activities with a sense of inner purpose to extract the sparks of godliness contained in these material entities and to elevate them to holiness. So this is another case. This is a situation that he's defrauding the Klippos. He's defrauding the world. The world thinks that he is just here to engage in worldly matters, and in truth, he is tricking the world and elevating the world instead. This is the avodah of Yaakov. Now the Rebbe says, let us contrast this with the avodah of Esav. What's the avodah of Esav? Excuse me. The avodah of Yisrael. The avodah Hashem, the divine service of Yisrael, is quite different. The brachas for material prosperity granted him are conferred upon him, like we said before. Besrara v'gilui panim, with nobility and in a revealed manner. That's what the Malach was communicating when he told him that your name is not going to be called Yaakov anymore, it's going to be called Yisrael. He does not have to conceal the godly intent of his material involvement, disguise himself, make the world think that he's engaging in material things just like anyone else in the world does. For material concerns do not create a conflict for him. He's initially, Malchatchila, beyond any challenges of the physical world. For him, there's no concealment of their godly source. He sees right through them. They're transparent. To cite an example, by simply eating his Shabbos meal, a Jew is performing a mitzvah. This is different from the task of refinement, the elevating of the sparks, in other words, which he performs during the week. During the week, a Jew practices deception every time performs a physical activity for a spiritual purpose. Because when he's eating, he eats, but it is with deception, because he's not performing a mitzvah by eating, because he is eating for the sake of heaven. He's deceiving him, he's deceiving the world, he's deceiving the Klippos, because eventually this is going to be turned around against the Klippos, to elevate the food to its source and holiness. On Shabbos, by contrast, the physical activity of eating itself reflects holiness. And this is actually later on in the Sicha, the Rebbe is going to explain that every Jew is this idea of Yaakov and Yisrael. Yaakov is during the week, on Shabbos he's a level of Yisrael. And this concept is alluded to by Yaakov being given the name Yisrael, which is granted him because you have shown mastery with angels and men and prevailed. Angels and men both refer to challenges involving the concealment of godly influence. Angels refer to the 70 spiritual archangels who serve as the channels through which the divine influence and maintained spiritual existence passes. Like we know, the name Elokim has to do with Hashem being concealed. So this is the concealment of Hashem that passes in through the entire world to give it its life force and vitality. Through this process of spiritual descent, through the level of Elokim, through these 70 archangels, including the Elokim and the simple pshat that we're talking about, the Malach of Esav, godliness becomes veiled. The veiling of godliness brought about by these angels leads to a greater degree of concealment. The challenges brought about by men, coarse individuals who ridicule Jews for observing the Torah and its mitzvahs. As it's painfully obvious, it is more difficult to overcome obstacles placed in one's path by humans than those which are brought about by spiritual beings. What's it mean, spiritual beings? I.e., the inherent veiling of godliness involved in the creation of man's material existence. You have the world. The world's a place under Shem Elokim. It's going under the Malachim that are involved with the physical world. We don't see godliness. But it's not as difficult to contend with that as when we actually have to face down and overcome our fears and the challenges placed by those that attack us for doing Torah mitzvahs. Because it's much more difficult to deal with people that attack Yidden for performing Torah mitzvahs. For this reason, the first section of the entire 4-part Shulchan Aruch begins by saying, do not be embarrassed by those who scoff al yevish from bnei adam amaligim, or shlo yisbayish bnei adam amaligim. This is the foundation of our entire divine service, Avodas Hashem. That's why it's the first thing, the first part of Shulchan Aruch. Before we can approach doing anything, the first step of the day, that's what we have to bear in mind, to break through the forces that conceal godliness. The advantages alluded to by the name Yisrael, the advantage alluded to by the name Yisrael, the ability to show mastery with malachim and anoshim and men and prevail, is that Yisrael has dominion and control over the concealment, over the Helm and Hester, perpetrated by both angels and men. In other words, both the spiritual concealment from above and those that are scoffing him down here below. These forces do not cause any concealment whatsoever for Yisrael. A level of Yisrael is not affected by any of this. Not only does the person that's on a level of Yisrael, do they not contend with him? These forces of Elokim and Anoshim, these Malachim and scoffers, do not challenge him. They consent to the brachas that he receives, like it says that the Malach of Esav consented and said, you're right, I'm giving you, I agree to the brachas that was given to you by Yitzchak. Yisrael does more than defeat the archangel of Esav. In other words, what we said, that he overcame the Malach of Esav. He compels that Malach to give him a bracha, in keeping with the dictum, even his enemies will establish peace with him, like it says in the Pasuk. This motif also includes the greatest enemy, not just enemies as in human enemies, the ultimate enemy. Who's the ultimate enemy? The primordial serpent, in other words, the Nachash HaKadmoni, the Yetzer Hara, the source of all sin and conflict, Klippus. Not only will this force not present any opposition to Yisrael, it will establish peace with him and even provide him with assistance. It'll even help him out. Further on, he goes on, number 3. The distinction between the levels of Yaakov and Yisrael can be clarified based on the Maimon Likkutei Torah that interprets the verse that it says in the brachas that Bilam said. It says, "Lo hibit oven beYaakov lo yira amol beYisrael." God does not perceive sin with Yaakov, nor does he see a struggle within Yisrael. In the simple sense, amol and struggle is referring to the struggles of sins, meaning bad, negative. But the Rebbe is going to translate it into 2 levels. There's actual sin that he doesn't see, and then he doesn't see the struggle that's necessary to overcome sin. And just to say it outside, it depends when you're dealing with Yaakov Yisrael. When you're dealing with Yaakov, there is a struggle, but he doesn't succumb, so he doesn't see the sin. When you're dealing with Yisrael, there isn't even a struggle. And therefore, it says he doesn't loira amol b'Yisrael. Even the struggle he doesn't see by the Yidden. So let's see it inside. On the level of Yaakov, there is no sin. He does not transgress. His thought, speech, and action are flawless. There is, however, the need for struggle. That's why all it says, loira oven b'Yaakov. It doesn't say Yaakov must struggle not to sin, because the veiling and concealment of godliness present him with challenges they must work to overcome. Therefore, Yaakov is given the title, my servant. It says, Yaakov Avdi. Why is he called an Eved? What does an Eved indicate? A term that connotes labor and toil. Eved from the word avoida. He needs to toil and put in effort to be able to overcome and prevent himself from succumbing to the Yetzer Hara. For refining one's animal soul requires such efforts of avoida, of toil. Therefore, it doesn't say v'loira amol b'Yaakov. Yaakov does need amol. He does need a struggle. He needs to fight off, if you will, the idea of the Yetzer Hara. However, Hashem does not perceive sin within Yaakov, For ultimately, Yaakov summons up inner strength and overcomes his Yetzer Hara, and therefore, V'loira oven beYaakov, V'lohibit oven beYaakov. There's no oven, there's no actual sin, because Yaakov is strong enough to be victorious in his struggles. With regard to Yisrael, by contrast, Alter Rebbe explains in Likkutei Sichos, there is no need for struggle. He does not have to exert himself and contend with his Yetzer Hara. Yisrael has already shown mastery past tense with angels and men and prevailed. The challenges are behind him. He has already triumphed over and nullified all the concealments and veils that obscure godliness. So therefore, it's lo'ira amal. There's no struggle even. Therefore, the divine service, Avodas Hashem of Yisrael, does not involve a struggle with forces opposed to holiness, godliness, Kedusha. Instead, his efforts are dedicated solely to reaching higher and higher within the domain of Kedusha itself, going from strength to strength. So in section 4, the Rebbe brings an interesting story that happened with the Tzemach Tzedek, and this story is going to have one part is going to exemplify the avodah of Yaakov, and the second part of the story is going to exemplify the avodah of Yisrael. So he says in 4, the previous Rebbe related that once, while sitting with Chassidim at a Fabrengen, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, suddenly leapt onto the table and with great fervor exclaimed, "Our sage's statement says, what difference does it make if you kill it entirely or kill it partially?" This has to do with halachas, with nezikin and damages, but when an animal is killed or damaged. But the point is, the Tzemach Tzedek was deriving this for our inner animal, our personal animal that is being killed. So you could totally kill it, totally get rid of your nefesh habahamis, your animal soul, or you could kill it partially, that you subdue and harness your nefesh habahamis. It can be applied to the Yetzer Hara. It is, however, at least necessary to kill it partially. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek said, that at least you have to have the partial killing, kotla palga in the expression of the Gemara. You need to not completely give in to the animal, to the inner animal, to the Yetzer Hara. Later on in that Fabrengen, after some time passed, as the Fabrengen unfolded and led to dancing, the Tzemach Tzedek continued and addressed the above theme again. When one kills the Yetzer Hara, as it is written, "My heart is slain within me, v'libi cholol b'kirbi," one's life takes on an entirely new cast. It's a whole different life. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek said. So really, we have two sections over here. One, a partial killing of the Yetzer Hara, and another, an entire killing of the Yetzer Hara. These two maxims of the Tzemach Tzedek reflect the different levels of Yaakov and Yisrael. On the level of Yaakov, the lower level, like we said, he's dealing with the world, he's dealing with the Yetzer Hara, he's dealing with the men and the angels and the concealment of the world. It is necessary to wage war against Yetzer Hara, killing it at least partially. Life is filled with struggles, so the killing it partially means I don't let the Yetzer Hara any control when it comes to my thought, speech, and deed, though inside it's really fighting me all the time. On the level of Yisrael, by contrast, the Yetzer Hara has already been slain entirely, and existence takes on a new visage, a whole new appearance. It becomes a life of satisfaction and pleasure because you're not dealing with the struggles. Everything is going smoothly. So he says in 5, the paths of divine service, Avodas Hashem, associated with the two levels of Yaakov and Yisrael, reflect two rungs within the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul. The Hebrew letters of the name Yaakov can be divided as Yud Akev. In us, it's supposed to be divided over here. It's supposed to be separated, the two parts of the word Yaakov. In essence, only the Akev, the heel, the lowest level of the soul shines within the person. As such, it is possible for the body and the Nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, to conceal the light of the divine soul, and he must contend with them. The name Yisrael, by contrast, can be divided into the words, again, it's supposed to be a space over here, Li Roish, the head for me. The head, the highest level of the soul, shines within him. It's amazing. Akev versus Rosh, two extremes. Accordingly, because you're dealing with the head, the higher part of the soul, so there is no need for war. You have shown mastery with angels and men and prevailed. So this is literally embodied in the actual names of the of Yaakov and Yisrael, Akev versus Rosh. Now, these two things can be painted in a broad sense and can be painted in a more specific sense. So the Rebbe is first going to paint it in a very broad sense. Two types of Yidden. In general, the name Yisrael describes tzaddikim, the righteous, that are like, they were rei libi chol bekirbi, they mastered nefesh habahamis, they transformed the nefesh habahamis, they don't struggle anymore with nefesh habahamis. While the name Yaakov relates to Beinanim, but the Alter Rebbe called the intermediate man, which is the attribute of all men, which means Alter Rebbe says midas kol adam. This is something that's applicable to all the level of Beinim. Tzaddikim is something that's only unique individuals. So that is one way of dividing and delineating between Yaakov and Yisrael. Two different people. But we said it's not that way. Initially, at the beginning of the Sicha, we said that Yaakov and Yisrael apply by every person, not just that tzaddikim have the level of Yisrael. More particularly, within the Avodas Hashem, the divine service of the ordinary man, the name Yaakov refers to our Avodas Hashem, our divine service during the week, while the name Yisrael refers to our divine service, Avodas Hashem on Shabbos, like we said before. During the week, eating, for example, is not a mitzvah. But it can be done l'shem shamayim. That's akev, that's trickery. That we have to trick our Yetzer Hara and say, I'm going to do just like you want me to do, I'm going to eat. But afterwards, here's what I'm really plotting behind the scenes. I'm plotting to use this energy to daven and to learn and to do mitzvahs. Whereas on Shabbos, the very eating itself is a mitzvah that we said earlier, that's the level of Yisrael. And in general, the whole Shabbos experience is the experience of Yisrael. We're not engaging with the world, whereas our whole weekday experience, we're engaged in the world, we're involved in worldly matters. That's Yaakov. Now, does that mean that only ordinary people can have the Yaakov in Yisrael? So, and not tzaddikim? Tzaddikim are only Yisrael? So the Rebbe says no. Even tzaddikim, they also have Yaakov in Yisrael. Moreover, within the divine service of the righteous themselves, of tzaddikim themselves, there is a rung, a level associated with Yisrael, and a rung in proportion to their level of tzidkus, of righteousness, associated with Yaakov. A tzaddik also has within himself levels of Yaakov and Yisrael. Even though he doesn't have the level of Yaakov like a Beinani has, that he actually has to struggle with his Yetzer Hara, etc., because v'libi chol bekirbi, because he transformed his Yetzer Hara. But there is certain things that in comparison to Yisrael, in comparison to his level of service of Yisrael, he is considered Yaakov. Perhaps he doesn't say it over here. Perhaps we could say it's when the tzaddik himself is engaged in spiritual pursuits and when he's engaged in physical pursuits, even though by him, when he's engaged in eating and drinking, it's not in such a way that he faces the struggles of a Beinani, but still in all, in comparison to when he's involved in the spiritual, that is still the Yaakov with him. How do we know that? So the Rebbe says in the middle of this paragraph that the fact that even a tzaddik has the level of the avodah of Yaakov from Yaakov Avinu himself. Indeed, this is obvious from the Talmudic passage quoted at the outset, which states that even after Yaakov, our father, our patriarch, was given the name Yisrael, from time to time the name Yaakov was used to refer to him even as an individual. Not only to his descendants, the Jewish people as a whole are called by the name Yaakov. Even Yaakov Avinu was called Yaakov afterwards. How come? That means to tell you that Yaakov, as great as he was Yaakov Avinu, one of the three, and even one of the highest, or the highest of all the others. He was still called Yaakov afterwards, because even in his avodah of being such a high tzaddik, there are levels that comparable to the Yisrael level within him. There was the level of Yaakov as well. So the Rebbe concludes this thought. Since every Jew, both Beinim and Tzaddikim, possesses a level termed Yaakov, the Torah still refers to Yaakov by that name, even after he has advanced to the extent that he's been renamed Yisrael. The name Yaakov still remains because even afterwards a Jew must carry out a type of divine service that reflects the approach of Yaakov. So now the Rebbe goes on in section 6 over here. As mentioned above, the Torah states, Hashem does not perceive loihibit oven b'Yaakov. He does not perceive sin within Yaakov, nor does he see struggle within Yisrael. While the verse excludes struggle for Yisrael, it only says Leira amal lehibit. Lehibit oven b'Yaakov leira amal b'Yisrael. It does not for Yaakov. When it comes to Yaakov, it does not exclude the idea of amal. Yaakov must confront struggle. Yeah, that's what he deals with. The level of Yaakov involves an arduous, dangerous, and ongoing battle with the Yetzer Hara. Nevertheless, Yaakov has the inner strength to prevail in this struggle and remain free of sin. As we mentioned right away at the beginning, it says, Loihibit oven b'Yaakov. Even though he has amal, even though he has struggle, but actual sin, that even Yaakov doesn't have. So even if a person looks at himself and they say, I am a Yaakov, but that doesn't mean that an actual Ma'aser Poel, I am Chas v'Shalom doing something wrong. For every Jew, is Neitzer Matoi Ma'aser Yodei Li'Yispoer, that every Jew is the branch of my planting, the work of my hands in which I take pride, which means he is a Chelik Elokam Mal Mamish, he is an actual part of Hashem. As such, just as it is impossible for anyone to have power over Hashem, over God, so too it is impossible for anyone to exert any authority over a Jew's soul if he resists. Obviously, that's a crucial part. We need to choose to do so. For a Jew always has the inner strength to be victorious in the struggle. Indeed, he has been assured that he will ultimately prevail, as it says, no one will remain estranged from you. And we have been promised, all of Israel has a portion in the world to come. This promise, like all concepts in the Torah, is relevant to our avodas Hashem at present, even though it's something that happen later on. Is when Mashiach comes. Kol Yisrael is when the Mashiach comes. What's the relevance now? The assurance that we will ultimately be victorious in the struggle should infuse us with strength and happiness. This strength and happiness will in turn facilitate the victory and hasten its coming. As my revered father-in-law, the Rebbe, would say, in other words, the previous Rebbe, a soldier proceeds with a happy melody, although he goes to a place of danger. And that transforms his mindset and causes him to be victorious. In other words, that a soldier goes out to battle singing a march of victory. Why? Because that way of going out to battle with a march of victory, that causes him, that gives him the strength to overcome any types of despondency that would drag him down. So by knowing that we will prevail, we will all be victorious in the struggle, that makes the struggle easier to overcome now that we're able to sing a song even while in the midst of the struggle. So he says in 7, based on the above, we can appreciate the implication of the liturgical hymn sung at the Malav Malka meal on Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, Al Tira Avdi Yaakov, do not fear Yaakov, my servant. As explained in Likkutei Sichos that we mentioned before. On Shabbos, we said earlier from Likkutei Sichos, the Jewish people are on the level of Yisrael. Then there's no need for strenuous effort to refine the world's material substance. You're engaged in the material world, you're eating, you're drinking, you're enjoying Shabbos, and it's all a mitzvah. There's no clash with the physical world. As the Shabbos departs, however, Jews must once again make the transition to the level of Yaakov, my servant, Avdi Yaakov, resuming their mission of refining material entities in the 6 weekdays that follow. Therefore, every Jew is then assured from above. Al tira avdi Yaakov, do not fear Yaakov, my servant. He is told not to fear to descend to the level of Yaakov, my servant. He's leaving the state of Yisrael. He's engaging now with the world that he's been separated for the last day. And now he's engaging with the world. He says, Yaakov, don't worry. Even though you're going into the state of Yaakov, don't worry. So the Rebbe says, it's not just that Hashem is telling him, don't worry. It's much more than that. These words are more than a charge not to be fearful. They are empowering, what's called in Yiddish, nesinas koyach, providing a person with the strength to proceed without fear and carry out the avodas Hashem, his divine service, with happiness. And once you are performing your avodas Hashem with simcha, with happiness, so that itself, it makes it even easier. This happiness in turn makes the person's task easier and hastens its completion. That should be completed much quicker than if the person would not be doing it with happiness, enabling him to see the generous recompense for his efforts, schar toiv ba'amola in Lashon Kodesh, including the ultimate reward, the coming of the era, which is Yom Shekuli Shabbos Umnucha L'chayei Olamim, which is all Shabbos and rest for life everlasting, meaning attaining that level, complete transcendence beyond Yaakov to the level of the ultimate level of Yisrael.